The memorials Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Corporal Jeanette McNeely. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Bombardier Ronald Rex Standen. Ronald Standen was born on the 31st of October 1919 in Armidale, New South Wales, the son of Arthur and Ellen Standen. Known commonly by his middle name Rex, he grew up alongside siblings Margaret, Trevor and David, and went on to find employment as a public servant. Rex Standen enlisted at Martin Place in Sydney on the 2nd of July 1940. Posted to the 6th Battalion, he was transferred to the 1st Regiment, Royal Australian Artillery. After suffering a bout of influenza whilst training at Liverpool to the west of Sydney in late November, Standen was transferred to the newly raised 2nd 15th Field Regiment. The regiment began training at Ingleburn with 18-pounder guns, the type used during the First World War, many of which were older than the gunners themselves. In January 1941, the regiment moved to the new Holsworthy camp in Sydney. In May, Standen and his unit moved to Bathurst, where they carried out joint training exercises. In July, Standen was promoted to the rank of Bombardier, and at the end of the month, he and his regiment embarked at Sydney, bound for overseas service. While the rest of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force had been sent to the Middle East, the 8th Division was sent to Malaya, Singapore and the islands to Australia's north. Standen and the 2nd 15th went into camp at Singapore, where the men trained. Throughout November and the start of December 1941, it seemed that war with Japan was increasingly likely. Late in the afternoon of the 5th of December, Standen's unit began moving from Singapore across the straits to the state of Johor in Malaya to relieve the 2nd 10 Field Regiment. The 2nd 10th was operating on the east coast of Malaya in support of the 8th Division's 22nd Brigade. The 2nd 15th was headquartered and took up position at Kulang Rubber Estate. By the start of January 1942, the Japanese had advanced through Thailand and most of Malaya. The 2nd 15th left Kulang and moved north to reinforce the Allied troops who would fight the main Japanese force when it reached Johor. The regiment's batteries went to Muar on the west coast, also further north to join the 27th Brigade, to Paya Lang Estate under the command of the 2nd 20th Battalion, and near Gemis under the command of the 2nd 30th Battalion. Soon after moving into position, the regiment's gunners were in almost constant action, providing artillery support for the infantry withdrawal along the main peninsula towards Singapore. In the first days of the campaign, the regiment fired 7,950 rounds in the Gemis-Segmart sector alone. By the end of the month, the last of the Allied troops had crossed the causeway and reached Singapore. Among the last to cross were the troops from the 2nd 15th, who formed the last Allied artillery units in action on the peninsula. Having crossed the causeway, which was subsequently blown up, the regiment was deployed to the western area in support of the 22nd Brigade. Preceded by heavy bombardment, the Japanese attack on Singapore began at 10:30 p.m. on the 8th of February, when 2 Japanese divisions crossed the Johor Strait. The 2nd 15th inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers and sank some barges. But with communications cut, heavily outnumbered, and the Japanese infiltrating between positions, the regiment withdrew towards Singapore, providing artillery support when needed. By the 13th of February, the battle for Singapore Island was all but over, and 2 days later, British forces surrendered. The regiment began moving from Tangling Golf Course to Selarang Barracks Changi and into Japanese capture. Initially imprisoned in the sprawling Changi prisoner of war camp, members of the 2nd 15th were soon allocated to external work parties. The first parties were dispatched around Singapore and southern Malaya. But later, members of the 2nd 15th found themselves in work parties bound for the camps along the Thailand-Burma Railway and in Borneo, as well as Japan, French Indochina, Java, Sumatra and Malaya. While the horrors of Japanese captivity are well known, particularly the experiences of those forced to work on the Burma-Thailand Railway, the worst and most dangerous period in a prisoner's life was travelling in captivity. Overcrowding, sickness, disease, and the dangers posed by Allied submarines caused stress and anxiety. Conditions on board ships were severe. Over 1,000 prisoners are crammed into spaces suitable for only a few hundred, and given little food, fresh water, or adequate sanitation. The prisoners, call these transports hell ships. In September 1944, Rakio Maru and Kachudiki Maru were transporting Australian and British prisoners of war from Singapore to Japan. The prisoners were all survivors of the Burma-Thailand Railway. On the morning of 12th of September 1944, the convoy was attacked by American submarines in the South China Sea. Rakio Maru was sunk by the USS Sea Lion II and Kachudiki Maru by the US Pampanito. Prisoners able to evacuate the ships spent the following days in life rafts or clinging to wreckage in open waters. About 150 Australian and British survivors were rescued by the American submarines. A further 500 were picked up by Japanese destroyers and continued the journey to Japan. Those who were not rescued perished at sea. A total of 1,559 Australian and British prisoners of war were killed in this incident, all missing at sea. The total number of Australians killed was 543. Amongst the dead was Ronald Standen. He was 24 years old. With no grave but the sea, today he is commemorated at the Labuan Memorial in Malaysia, which commemorates over 2,000 men who have died whilst prisoners of war in Borneo and the Philippines and have no known grave. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left amongst more than 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his name, listed on the Labuan Memorial, is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Bombardier Ronald Rex Standen, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.